Hello, my name is Rebecca Lunsford, and I'm your host for the Real Talk series, Healing Life's Trauma. And today I have a special guest, Jane Whitaker. And Jane and I know each other. Actually, we're from the same little town here right now. We both live here in our little Williamsburg town. And we're going to talk about a lot of different things today that Jane has experienced. But I want to give you a little background on her first. So Jane is from Nova Scotia, Canada, and she came to the U.S. to attend Southern Seminary in Louisville, Kentucky, where she graduated with an MDiv in 1995.
MDiv.
And then, so what is it, MDiv? Explain that real quick.
Master of Divinity. It's
Okay.
a degree that qualifies you to do ministry, basically. Kind of
Okay.
makes you go through a rigorous process that I think is really valuable, so that you are thinking well about your faith and theories and all the rest of it. So it's a good process. Yeah.
Okay, well, that's interesting. So I didn't know what that was. I've heard of it before, but I didn't know exactly what it was.
Sure.
Okay, so she was clinically trained and worked as a hospital chaplain at Norton Hospital and Cosair's Children's Hospital. And then Jane moved to Williamsburg in 1997 to work at the then Cumberland College, which is now University of the Cumberlands.
Right.
And she raised her 3 children here in Williamsburg. And she started in student services at the college, and then she directed Mountain Outreach and taught in the religion department before getting her PhD in psychology. And then she's been a full-time professor teaching psychology since 2007. So thank you for being here with us today, Jane. I'm so excited for you to talk to us about some interesting topics. So let's start with talking a little bit about your work as a hospital chaplain.
Yeah, so I was really fortunate to get a job right out of my graduate work, and working with people, in some really ultimate crisis moments of their lives. And it's tough work, but it's so meaningful. When people come into the hospital, they're in those really vulnerable moments of, there's been a trauma, there's been an accident, or they've got a diagnosis, or a family member is sick, and they're kind of in that terrifying moment. And really at Chaplain, what our job is to sit with them in their fear and in their pain and just become present. And in that way represent that they're not alone and that God is with them, or however they understand God. It's not a time that when you try to convert anybody. It's not about that at all. It's really about just being present with people in their pain and giving them support and comfort in that space. So it's really
horrible
to be really sacred work, really meaningful work. I really, really enjoyed it, but it was tough. I got to be honest.
I can't imagine having to see, especially with the children's work that you did, there had to be a lot of very ill and, children dying and family having to deal with that. That's something that nobody ever wants to think about or experience.
Right. I've thought about a lot. I didn't have children when I was doing that work, and I was working in oncology, so children who were getting cancer diagnoses, and it was really pretty incredibly hard then. But as a parent, I couldn't imagine. When my kids hit about 3 or 4, that's when many children are diagnosed with like leukemia, some of those blood disorders. And I remember just sort of holding my breath through those years with my own kids and being grateful, that we didn't have to walk that journey. But I will say this: the amazing thing about that work is how resilient those kids were. They taught me a lot about living in the moment. They were not like worried about their dreams not coming true. That was the parents' pain. It was, all the vision and dream you have for your children, but children would be just playing in the moment. And, I remember playing this game with this little boy one time, and the question, it was one of these games that has sort of meaningful questions and silly questions all mixed in together. And one of the meaningful questions came up was, what will you look like in 10 years? And I was like, oh my gosh, he probably won't be here in 10 years. And so I had that moment of like, what's he going to say? And he got this serious look on his face. And then he looked at me and he said, I'll be old. I'll look like you.
Just 10 years.
and I just laughed. He's just living in the moment and thinking about, what's in front of him in this moment. And there was, I think, a lot of wisdom, honestly, to be gained from working and living alongside these children who just lived with what they had in front of them and sort of embraced those moments. And honestly, the neat thing, in the midst of the pain, other adults also kind of discovered that. Like they would discover that you can't always count on those long-term dreams. They're not always guaranteed, obviously. And so they tended to start to live more present. And some even would say they were grateful for the diagnosis, that it changed their lives and that they were living more meaningful lives. And so what we now in the field of psychology often refer to as post-traumatic growth, we had people that were starting to live better lives, more full lives than they had before a painful diagnosis. So it was a both incredibly hard and really meaningful job that I had for a couple of years there.
I'm assuming that that job would be very hard to fill long term. I would think there'd be a lot of people rotating because the trauma of seeing that on a daily basis could get really, really hard for someone.
Yeah, you would think so, but actually I know lots of chaplains who've been in the field for 20, 30 years. They've
Really?
figured it out. And I think it's, you don't take on someone else's pain as part of it. You allow them to have their own journey. And even though you feel it, you don't carry it. And then you kind of try to live more grateful and just live with what your life offers you, outside of that chaplaincy or that hospital room. So I grew a great deal from the privilege of that work, even though I was only there a few years. It was really meaningful for me.
That's amazing. I can't, like, I couldn't do that kind of work. It takes a special person to be able to work in that kind of environment and deal with those emotions on an almost daily basis, I'm sure.
I do think it's a calling for some, not for
Yeah,
everybody. I
yes.
don't know how I would have done long term either, to be honest. I really don't.
Especially having children. Once you had your children, I'm sure that would have been even worse. Being in the moment with that and raising your children at that age would have been probably a struggle.
Yeah, for
So
sure.
let's talk about ACEs.
Okay, yeah. So that's ACEs stands for Adverse Childhood Experiences. And, when I started my PhD in psychology, it was kind of a new area in the field, understanding childhood trauma. And what we've learned, the ACEs is actually a test, it's an assessment, and people can look it up online, you can take it yourself. And it measures the number of adverse events that children have had to go through. And what we've learned about ACEs is that it's taught us a lot that what predicts people having problems in adulthood often is the accumulation of traumatic events they had in childhood. So, and what seems like maybe not such a big event, or it may be, growing up in poverty, or it may be a parent who's got some mental illness or even depression. Or it might have been severe abuse or certainly sexual trauma or any kind of trauma. But the more of those events that you've had, a divorce in the family sometimes can be a traumatic event, certainly for a child. It can also be a relief of trauma, to be honest. A divorce can actually relieve trauma if the relationship's been really, just difficult and explosive. But the number of those events, the higher your ACEs score, the higher it predicts problems in adulthood, including like substance abuse, domestic violence, obesity, heart disease, lots of health related issues that are tied to our emotional health. So we know the body is all connected. We're not just a spirit side, and we're not just a mental health. We're physical. We're all of that together, and they influence each other. So when we think about trauma, and I know you're talking about trauma a lot in this, the previous thinking was one big event, like certainly somebody who's sexually assaulted. That is very, very traumatic. But it can also be a collection of sort of micro events, small things over a period of time. So we've learned, like even say, for example, the Black population who've had discrimination many, many times. May not have been one major event, although many have experienced one big event or multiple big events, but it could be small rejections over and over, not getting served in a restaurant, somebody giving you a cold glare or a mean comment, and just those little things accumulating over time also kind of add up, and the body absorbs it and holds it. So the ACEs is a childhood measurement of that. And there's been some critique that it doesn't really look at like racial discrimination or with the LGBTQ community or with other minority populations. But it does give us at least a tool that in early childhood predicts problems and certainly trauma-like responses in adulthood. Does that make sense?
Yes, yes, very much. So, what age should you take this? If you go online and you wanted to, just kind of explore what the ACEs test was, what
Yeah.
age do you recommend someone take that? Like,
It's measured up to 18. So anybody past 18, or I mean, you could certainly take it before that as well. I mean, we can
okay,
take it with children. Again, it's just a tool. By itself, it's not really entirely that helpful, but it does have predictive potential to help us understand behavior. We used to misunderstand people's behavior. I'm thinking as a psychologist here, as I say we, I mean,
yes.
I'm one person in this field, but we used to misunderstand people's behavior as often just sort of willful, you're being rebellious or you're acting out based on your anger at your parents. And those things can be true. But now we understand so much better the impact of many small, painful, sort of traumatic like events all building up together. And
Okay, Jane. So tell me a little bit about your move from Nova Scotia, Canada. How old were you? And then your move to Louisville to attend school.
okay. Yeah, so I was 25. I had been actually I've been a professional musician before that, working in public schools, teaching, and then also freelancing as a clarinetist, saxophone player in Halifax. I had a really good job. I loved my job, and I really didn't leave for any problems there. I just felt like there was something more for me to do than the music world. I love the music world, and I don't mean to ever, discredit it at all, but it was not maybe where I was wanting to spend the rest of my life. So I left to go to seminary. Actually, came to Kentucky because I had a connection with a seminary in Nova Scotia. There was people that went back and forth and taught, and they said, you should go check it out, go to Louisville. And I just came for a visit, and I just fell in love. I felt like, oh, this is a great area. I loved it. People were so kind. I felt very much at home. And I just really embraced that experience. So there was some cultural difference between Halifax and Louisville for sure, a little bit of Southern culture, a few misunderstandings of words. Times where I remember the first time someone walked up to me and said, how y'all doing? And I was by myself, and I'm like, I'm all fine. Thank you. How are all? I didn't know what to say. I had to learn the lingo. Yeah.
Oh, I love that.
Yeah. Or I don't care to means I don't want to where I'm from. So
Uh,
if someone says, I don't care to do that, I'm like, okay, fine. You don't have to. And they're like, I said, I don't care to. And I said, I know.
a lot of
So
people, even from like, I know people from Georgia that come here and they don't understand that either. That must be a very Kentucky thing.
it must be. Yeah. So I had a few little funny things like that. But for the most part, I just really loved Louisville, and I loved the people, and I felt very at home there. When we moved to Cumberlands, to Williamsburg, I had probably more of a culture shock because if city to city was a little more similar in the mindset and the way I don't know, just the way you do things. City to rural was a bigger change for me. And I learned the hard way a few times that everybody's related. And so and so if you're telling somebody, it's like, I don't really know how, I don't understand that person. They're like, well, that's my cousin. Or, I'm like, oh yeah.
I've had that
So
experience too.
yeah. So it took me a little while. And I think people don't always, in a small town, they don't always trust that you're going to stick it out. People come and go, I think, come move in and move out. But I've been here since 1997. And I have felt very much embraced in this town, and made a lot of really, really good friends. And it's been a really good place to raise kids. It feels very safe. My children actually have gone off to college in the city, though. They've gone to Louisville. I think they appreciate a little more diverse ways of exploring the world and seeing the world and populations, but they are grateful. We're all
The,
very
the college has definitely grown since you've moved here in 97. If
grateful.
anybody's ever interested in going to college, and you should definitely check out the University of the Cumberlands. It is a
I
beautiful campus.
Yeah, it's been a very good school to work at. I'm very grateful for all the opportunities I've had there, and colleagues and friends, and it's home, really. It's been a good home.
Good. All right. So one last thing, I want you to talk a little bit about your work with attachment.
Okay, yeah. So I did my dissertation actually around attachment. So attachment is an understanding of relationships that really developed back in the 1950s. And we were trying to understand, how does a mother and a child bond? What kind of creates that bond? Is it because they're primary needs are getting met, they're getting fed, comforted, put to sleep and all that, or is there something else causing this bond to happen? And they discovered, that bond is really a lot about emotional comfort, that the more a parent attends to the child and really gives them support and emotional comfort, that bond is strong. And so a parent that's, I think, consistently attentive, don't have to be perfect at all, but it's
Mm.
consistently attentive so that the child feels like they start to trust them. Then they build what we call a secure attachment. And that attachment becomes, we believe, an internal kind of model of relationships. And so what happens by the time they're a year is they start to show patterns with the mother or with someone. It was initially studied with the mother, but it can be with a father or with any other kind of adult. But that internal model seems to be pretty strong, and it continues, and research supports it. It continues even into adulthood, so that our romantic relationships and our friendships sometimes mirror what that early relationship was like. Now, I say sometimes because there's always, our field's tentative. We're always looking at new research that gives us new insight. So the language I use is tentative on purpose. That's just the way we talk. But the earliest models include this secure type. And so a child that's securely attached at a year, lots of people have seen this, will cling to their mom when the mom's trying to leave, like grab around the legs and, cry and crawl after them. And then especially they leave the door and they'll just sit there and cry and be upset. And a stranger could come in, try to comfort them, and the child typically won't be comforted very well. They're kind of like, no, I want my mom. I want my mom. They'll keep crying. And then, sorry, my dog has a little asthma attack over there.
It's okay.
Then the mother comes back in, and the child who's still crying with the stranger suddenly goes, oh, it's mom, and I can relax, and they stop crying immediately and everything's good, right? So that's actually normal behavior. Stranger anxiety, separation anxiety at a year is super normal and not to be concerned with at all. If that continues a long time, into 4 or 5-year-olds, then it starts to be something that can be a little more problematic. But early on, that's super normal. And so secure attachment looks like that. A child that doesn't have that may have had a parent who, for many reasons, wasn't very present to the child. Now, it could be that the mother, or again, the other parent, either has depression, postpartum depression is a real problem, or has severe anxiety, or there's been a trauma in the family, like there's been a divorce, or they've moved, or somebody has passed away, or something major has happened. It can disrupt, even when a good parent is doing their best, it can interrupt that. The good news is that can actually be recovered over a period of time. If the parent continues to be attentive, then that can be repaired. But for children that don't have a very attentive parent, they might develop an insecure type of attachment. And it can go in one of two directions. They either become clingy, don't want the parent to go ever, never kind of get regulated in their emotions, or they shun the parent. And so the parent leaves and they're like, so I'll just talk to this person over here. And they show no real bond or attachment to that parent. And then there was a fourth type that was added later that is called disorganized attachment. And that is probably most likely due to some real significant abuse or neglect. And the child shows both clinginess and then sometimes aggression. So they might hit the parent, or they might bite the parent, or they might just scream and then run to a stranger and then back. And so really inconsistent behavior there. So the interesting thing about attachment, again, is that it does give us some insight into the child, but it really does help us also start to see and maybe understand why certain patterns persist into adulthood. So a child that has an insecure attachment, as clingy as a child, may become a clingy partner as an adult, and they don't want their partner to go anywhere, and they feel insecure when they leave, and they don't feel comfortable them having other friends, or they might just not really stalk them, but they just kind of can't leave them and allow them space to be themselves. And then the opposite can be true. A child that has this sort of detached insecure might never be able to build a good bond, not build a strong romantic relationship, and they just sort of keep starting a relationship and then just abandoning it over and over again. So I think attachment is a piece of the puzzle in understanding why people behave the ways that they do. It's not the whole story, but it's a piece of the puzzle that helps us understand. And so children that experience significant trauma early in those years might have a hard time having healthy relationships later on. Again, the good news is that really good therapy and support can help to heal that wound, sort of that attachment wound. And there's evidence that they can really recover and build good, strong relationships. In fact, we've learned that a very good, strong, trusting relationship over time can build a secure attachment. Doesn't always happen, but it can. And so that's kind of good news.
Yes, so that leads me to something we discussed the other day about um, this person that I know. I'm not going to say who it is, but this person that I know, she is 29, 30 years old, and she's never been married, never been engaged, has had, maybe 2-year relationship at most. And what I see in her is that she tends to very quickly attach to a person that she talks to. Like, they go on a date and everything seemed to be really well. And then, she wants to text and call and text instead
Yeah.
of allowing that space to see, where this might go. And it
Yeah.
seems like within a 2 or 3 week period, she's already in a place where she wants to ask that person what they want out of the relationship, which is very
Exactly.
soon, right?
Yeah. Right.
So I
Scares some
challenged,
people off, I'm sure.
yes. So I challenged her and I've told her this before, and so the last few times I've talked to her, I've challenged her to to try and break that pattern by going on 20 dates in 40 days, which I know is a lot. But
I
I
love.
said there's technology out there that you can, find a safe app and start just exploring. It doesn't have to be your type, like we said. A lot of people think they have a type and they don't ever give
Yeah.
other people that are outside that type the opportunity to see if there could be a relationship. And
Yes.
so they just keep going after this one person that has the same exact, thing that they see every time in the bio. Okay, that one has this word. I want to see that person.
Yeah.
Same word, same word.
Right.
Instead of going outside of that and then actually going on, a date every other day with a different person that has different life experiences and different ages, and just kind of experimenting with that. So she finally agreed to take me up on that. And she went on her first date last night and said it was completely terrible. It was the most horrible date she'd ever been on. And I was like, okay, please don't let that keep you from doing it again. I said, you need to keep going, keep
Keep
going.
going.
It's going to get better, and it may not, but
Good.
it's just for you to break that pattern of attaching so quickly to someone before you get to
Yeah.
know them well enough. And then it hurts, she's hurt in the end,
Right.
because when she finds out that they're not interested in a long term, or she finds out these little things about this person that aren't really what she wants, her
Yeah.
heart's already been given and she shouldn't have given it
Right.
yet. So
Yeah. I,
I'll
I
have to
think
let you
you're giving
know
her
how
some
it
really good.
turns
I
out.
think you're giving her some really good wisdom, honestly. I mean, I think
Yes.
it's really wise to date a lot of people. I really do. And I think some of it, depending on how you grew up, I grew up in a, kind of traditional Christian community. And there was that sort of belief that there's that one right person out there for you. I don't believe that at all anymore. I think there's lots of people that could be a good relationship, and there's lots that probably are not a good relationship. Um,
Yes.
but meeting lots of people, for one thing, you're taking away that fear that there's nobody else out there, because now she's like, there's somebody else,
Yes.
somebody else, until I find somebody that's a good match. But I do think sometimes our early wounds, and not at anybody's fault necessarily, like parents' fault or anybody blaming anybody, but our early wounds, again, might make us want to cling to a certain type of person. So there's a theory, and I don't know how legitimate this is. I gotta be honest. But I remember hearing Carl Jung talked about this idea that we are going to marry. You marry your father, right, or you marry your mother.
Yes.
You marry this person who, in some way, represents something that's a part of you and that's familiar, but also something that maybe is unfinished, unresolved. And so, like, if you have this relationship where there's been conflict that you've not really finished working through, whatever that is that needs to be, you might be attracted to somebody where you get to continue that work. And I say get to, that's not fun all the time at all. So
No.
it may be that you're drawn to people that are going to help you continue to mature. Now, again, that's sort of a Jungian thought. I don't know how true that really is, but I've seen it borne out a few times in ways that make me wonder, really, for real. So I do think it's wise, to date a long time and find somebody that you can trust. Seems like they're healthy, that they're a person that's pretty stable and healthy and um, really cares about you, not just about themselves. And you don't
Yes.
know a person until you've been together I think a pretty good period of time, and sort of see how they relate to their families too. How do they get
Yeah.
along with their friends? Do they have friends? Or
Yes.
are they more likely, sorry, excuse me, isolate because they're kind of looking for that one person to sort of solve their problems too. So
Yes.
looking for somebody healthy, and then trusting that you can actually develop an affection, and you can develop romantic feelings with somebody that you don't initially have this sort of wild attraction to, and
Yes.
actually build a healthier, longer term relationship in that way. So I think you gave
Yes.
good advice. I really
Well,
do.
I'm
And
no psychologist, so
oh,
I just
well,
thought, let's
we're
try
all
this.
still figuring this out. The human animal is complicated for lots of reasons. But I think you're
Okay.
giving some really good wisdom, especially again, if you've come from difficult relationships, if you've had trauma in relationships, you got wounds that are really there, and they're going to show up. They just are. And so can you find a relationship with somebody who's committed to helping you grow, and you can help to commit them grow together? You're both working through and committed to really healing and growing and maturing together. And I'm a big advocate of good counseling too.
Yes.
Couples therapy, or just other seeing personal counselors has been a huge help to my own life and many, many people I know. So I can't
That's great.
uh, miss a
So,
chance to recommend that too.
well, yeah, you should recommend that as a psychology person, right? Obviously, the benefit of a good
I,
psychologist can do for sure.
I do. And I do from a personal perspective. I've been in that chair too, which is a good place to be. So
Yes, I have too. And I have benefited from it for sure. All right, so I guess we'll wrap up. Is there anything else you wanted to say, or I'm just so glad that you were able to take some time out of your busy day and kind of inform some of us on some of the things that we really haven't thought about before, and maybe have touched some people and help people learn that it doesn't always have to be one huge traumatic experience that
yes,
has happened to have some sort of trauma that's in your life. And so
absolutely.
I'll just recognize that we've probably experienced some traumas over our lifetime. And if you're having
Yes.
those feelings, you need to
Yeah.
talk about it. That's what we're here to do, to talk. There's no
Yeah,
shame in talking about anything. So we're going to
absolutely.
get our real talk on. And I think we've had a really good talk today, and I really appreciate you.
Well, I appreciate you. I think what you're doing here is wonderful. And we need to talk. That's part of it. We need to be transparent and able to talk about what's going on. And that's part of the healing process. So thank you for doing this, Rebecca. I really
You're
appreciate it.
very welcome. Thank you so much.
All right.
Hopefully we'll see you again soon.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Okay. Bye-bye.